Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the DFS edition of this podcast. And, it's been a minute since I've done one of these. I haven't really found the time before, but since we have an extra week before this upcoming card, I was able to get a little time to put this together. And I'm going to change it up a little bit. I think I'm going to keep this pretty much strictly audio. Before I did clip like their profiles, their DraftKings profiles, and just screenshotted those, but I don't think anyone's really seeing those, and they're super low quality anyway, so I'm just going to keep it mainly audio here. Let me know what you guys think about that. But yeah, taking a look at this card, I think it's pretty interesting from a DFS standpoint. I think there are a lot of live dogs here, which means you can get some pretty unique lineups. And, I actually kind of prefer that because a lot of the time when the expected fighters win, you basically just have 7 or 8 guys tying for first place. So, yeah, I think this will be a pretty fun one. And, without further ado, let's just get right into these breakdowns here. Marc-Andre Barriault versus Abu Azaitar. And this one is lined pretty closely here. Barriault is 8,200 and Azaitar is 8,000. And we do have a striker versus striker matchup here. However, I do favor Barriault a bit more. Like I was saying in my Moneyline podcast, Barriault, he prefers to pressure. And, he does a lot better against guys who aren't as, defensively sound. It also looks like he does pack quite a bit of power in his punches. He's not super high volume, but, when he's got you back down and, his opponent's up against the cage, he can start to tee off on him. Like we saw in that Piotr fight where he was able to get into rhythm. He was the one pressuring. He was able to do quite a bit of damage on Piotr and eventually get him out of there. However, we saw in his previous fights that, he struggles against fighters who can kind of disrupt his rhythm, who can look to punish him as he's closing the distance. I don't think that's the case here with, Azaitar. Azaitar, he's got really powerful shots as well, really good counterpuncher. Decent footwork and head movement, but, he relies a bit on landing that counter shot. I don't think he really initiates the offense too much. He will, but more often than not, he is looking to land that counter. And, I do want to mention in this matchup, he is coming off a relatively long layoff. I think a 2-year layoff or a 1.5-year layoff, something like that. And, he is 35, so a little concerning for this matchup. That said, though, he is still pretty dangerous. He's got quite a bit of power, and especially with these Azaitar brothers, they're probably on something, so definitely dangerous. With that being said, though, that is his most likely path to victory, and that's going to be to land that counter shot on Barriault. And, like I've said on my Moneyline podcast, I do favor Barriault here. I think that if he brings the pressure, if he's the one moving forward, he very well could, win a decision victory here. I've seen in a number of his fights, Azaitar is more than happy to concede control of the octagon and, is getting backed up a lot of the time. So I'd say this is a pretty favorable matchup for Barriault here. But taking a look at this from a DraftKings perspective, I'm probably not going to play Azaitar, in my cash games. He's pretty reliant on that bomb landing, but if it doesn't, he's going to be a pretty low-paced fighter over 3 rounds. I don't think he's going to score too much, especially if he loses too, right? Because I think if it goes to a decision, I think that Barriault is going to be the one who pulls ahead. But who knows? Again, like I said, these Azaitar brothers, they're a bit shady, and who knows if they got a couple of these judges in their pocket. But assuming they don't, I think that Barriault will likely win a decision victory if it gets there. Azaitar is extremely dangerous in the first round, so from a GPP standpoint, you could probably take a few shots on him. He is live for that knockout, especially early, and he could potentially get that early knockout bonus, but I'm not sure that's too likely here. He is coming off a pretty long layoff. The timing could be off, and I do want to mention his cardio is a bit questionable. In a lot of his fights, he starts to slow down quite a bit after that first round. He doesn't completely gas out to the point where he's huffing and puffing and he's just getting sloppy in there, but his output kind of falls off a bit after that first round. But taking a look at Barriault, I wouldn't be too opposed to playing him in cash games or GPP. I think he's relatively safe for cash. He's only 8,200. I don't think he gets knocked out, and if that's the case, if he doesn't get knocked out early, I think he can win the decision and have decent output. I think he could definitely score like 85, 90 points just from significant strikes, and he might even get the knockout late if Azaitar starts to slow down much, but I wouldn't count on that. I think he's a pretty safe cash play, relatively speaking. And from a GPP perspective, I don't think he's terrible either. I mean, he's at 8,200, meaning he's a pretty decent filler piece, but I wouldn't really build my lineups around him. So yeah, I'm going to favor Barriault a little more here in cash games and GPP. But I definitely do think Azaitar might be worth the stab for GPP, although I'm not super high on him. Shane Young versus Omar Morales, and this fight supposedly has been canceled, but now I'm getting some news saying that Shane Young might clear protocols before fight day, so I'm just going to keep this up here just in case he does. But taking a look at these guys from a DraftKings perspective, Shane Young, he's 7,500 and Morales is 8,700. And, Morales, he's a pretty good kickboxer, but, he is going to be making his second fight at, 145. And I'm not sure this is his division. I mean, he's going to be the bigger guy in this matchup, but I'm not sure that the size advantage is really going to translate or really going to be too advantageous for him. If anything, I think it works against him because I've always suspected he's had some gas tank issues, and even though he doesn't completely gas out as the fight goes on, he does start to fatigue a bit, and you can kind of see it in his body language and also the way he throws some of his punches. They become a little sloppier and a little bit slower. Although it does look like his power still translates through to the later rounds, it's just his output decreases a little bit and his hand speed also slows down a bit too. I think his shots get a little more telegraphed. His opponent, Shane Young, very tough kid, primarily a striker as well, and is coming off of a pretty nasty knockout to Ludovic Klein. And, taking a look at this matchup, I do favor Young a little bit more because I think he's got a little more output. I mean, I do think that Morales is the better striker, but I don't think that Young is too far behind. I think Young can keep it pretty competitive on the feet. Omar Morales can crack though, and especially since Young is coming off of a knockout loss, I think that if he hasn't allowed his chin to fully recover, he could potentially get knocked out here. Since especially since Morales hits pretty hard, and the power might really be the only thing that translates coming down to 145. But as far as DraftKings go, I mean at 8,700, I don't know if I really want to play Morales because, again, my issue with him, he's kind of a low output fighter, and if he's not getting the knockout, he's not going to score too well if he wins the decision. And that's assuming he wins the decision, because I feel that if it does go to a decision, I think I do favor Shane Young here. I think he's got the output. I think he's a bit more well-rounded, and he's coming from a solid camp in City Kickboxing who, will game plan against opponents. And I think the proper game plan against, Morales is to, strike with him a bit and then look to tie him up, put him against the cage, which, we have seen Shane Young do, look to tire him out. And, as the fight goes on, I favor Young quite a bit. Going into the second and third round, I think that Morales would be a little slower. His shots are going to come out a little slower, and I think Young will be the one who's going to beat him to the punch and likely be able to get out of the way of those, the power shots of Morales as Morales starts to fatigue a bit as the fight progresses. With that said, though, I definitely feel that Morales is still a bit dangerous. Again, like I said before, he's got quite a bit of power, and he is a headhunter. So if Young is, again, hasn't fully recovered from that last knockout, which was only about 5-6 months ago, if he hasn't recovered from that and Morales is able to land clean on him, he could very well knock him out. So for that reason, I don't think Morales is a full fade on GPP. I think he could potentially get a knockout, but he's pretty reliant on it. So that's why, I say strictly GPP. And I have a feeling he won't be played too much, so he might be a good pivot play. Although I think Morales or Shane Young might be the side to play here. I think from a cash game perspective, he's a bit safer to play. I mean, he is only, let's see here. Yeah, he's 7,500. And, I think he's got some decent paths to victory. I think that he does have the output advantage as well. So if it goes to a decision, I favor how much he'll score. And, aside from the possible durability issue that he hasn't fully recovered from that knockout a few months ago, I think that he should be able to win a decision here just based off of volume and possibly aggression and a little bit of control time as well. And from a GPP perspective, I think he's decent there as well. He's not going to be getting the finish or anything, but, you always do need a few underdogs on your lineup. Something to keep in mind also is this fight might not happen, so definitely have someone else in place to substitute out just in case the fight falls through. And someone else, or a few other fighters that I really like, as underdogs potentially are Robertson and Jamie Mullarkey. Pretty similarly priced, so if you're unable to get Shane Young, I recommend pivoting over to those guys. So maybe don't put those guys in your lineup with Shane Young as well. So just something to keep in mind there. But to quickly recap, I don't really like Omar Morales for cash and might play him a little bit for GPP, but I just don't like what he brings to the table. He's really knockout reliant, and that's obviously good for GPP, but makes him a little unreliable. As far as Shane Young goes, I think he's a decent cash play. I like him to win, so obviously, decent cash play and a decent GPP play in my opinion. Modestas Bukauskas versus Michał Oleksiejczuk, and Bukauskas is going to be 7,700, and Oleksiejczuk is 8,500. And we have another striker versus striker matchup. And I tend to favor Oleksiejczuk here a little more. I believe he's the quicker striker. He's the more technical striker, and I think he'll hit a bit harder too in a lot of these exchanges. The main concerns for him, though, is he is giving up a ton of size and has shown some cardio issues as well. So, if Bukauskas is able to clinch him up, work him against the fence, or even take him down, Oleksiejczuk will struggle quite a bit, but I really haven't seen that from Bukauskas' game. I think this one will primarily be standing. Both guys are just going to look to strike. And, as far as Bukauskas goes, he's, again, primarily a striker and, not a very explosive or quick one at that. He's a bit slow on the feet. He does have decent footwork. He's got a decent jab, but he does wing a lot of his shots, and they are a bit telegraphed. Also, defensively, he is a bit hittable. He leaves himself open to, counterattacks quite a bit, like we saw in his fight against Crute, and, just a number of his other fights in the regional scenes, too. He does seem to struggle a bit against the cage as well, but, again, for the sake of this matchup, I think it's primarily going to be a striking affair, so I don't think it'll matter too much. But what I have noticed is that Bukauskas does his best work at distance, and I don't think Oleksiejczuk is going to give him any room. He's going to look to back Bukauskas up against the cage and probably dig to the body, and as soon as the hands start to drop for Bukauskas, Oleksiejczuk is probably going to start winging bombs to the head and likely get him out of there. I think there's a good chance that Oleksiejczuk is able to get Bukauskas out of there. However, Oleksiejczuk does seem to be a bit of a front runner. He tends to expend quite a bit of energy in that first round, just dig into the body, winging those hooks. So that's a little bit concerning, especially if Bukauskas survives going into the second and third round, things could get a little dicey. So taking a look at this fight from DraftKings perspective, I do favor Oleksiejczuk here quite a bit. I'm gonna look to play him a decent amount in GPP. I really do think he knocks out Bukauskas here because I really don't think Bukauskas is really UFC level in my opinion. I have seen Bukauskas hurt and dropped on the regional level, and against Oleksiejczuk, who's going to be much quicker than him, and he throws with nasty intent. I think that there's a good chance he gets him out of there. But from a cash game perspective, I like Oleksiejczuk here too. Little bit risky, I understand, but at 8,500, I don't think he's a terrible play. And looking at some of the alternatives, I'm not as intrigued with those as opposed to Oleksiejczuk, who I think has really, really solid finishing upside. From a GPP perspective, Bukauskas might be worth a shot, especially if Oleksiejczuk isn't able to get him out of there early. He could take him, into the later rounds and look for a finish there. So Bukauskas not completely out of play here for GPP, but I'm probably going to avoid him completely for cash games. And for Oleksiejczuk, I think he's solid GPP and cash game play. I really think he should be much more favored in this matchup, but ultimately there are concerns with cardio, and if he isn't able to get Bukauskas out of there early, things could get really sweaty. So yeah, overall, I really like Oleksiejczuk for GPP and decent amount for cash games, although again, it is a little risky, but that is how it is, especially since a lot of the times you're filling out your lineup and you need someone who kind of fills in that mid-range area, and I think Oleksiejczuk, he's a good spot there. Jared Gooden versus Abubakar Nurmagomedov, and Nurmagomedov is going to be 9,000 here, and Gooden is going to cost you 7,200. And straight up, I just don't think I'll have too much exposure to this matchup here. Firstly, with Abubakar Nurmagomedov, like I said in my other podcast, he's probably the worst Nurmagomedov, on the roster. But, just taking a look at his overall skill set, he's yeah, obviously, he's a wrestler. He'll like to get the fight to the ground, look for, top control, lay that ground and pound. But I just don't think that he has the heart or the cardio to really, warrant paying 9,000 for him. He was completely gassed in his fight against Bojan Veliskovich, where I believe that was only a 2-round fight too. That second round, he was really, really huffing and puffing in there. And then obviously there's that fight with Zawada where, he wasn't, top control and ended up getting choked out via triangle choke. And so you really have to question his defensive BJJ or really just his awareness in the grappling. And also just how quickly he tapped to that submission. A little troubling and not a good look in my opinion. However, I don't think that is going to matter too much here because he's got a pretty favorable matchup in Jared Gooden here, who historically has had a pretty weak ground game. Even on the regional scene, we've seen him taken down and controlled for long periods of time against really inexperienced grapplers. So more often than not, I'm going to side with Nurmagomedov here. I think that he should be able to get Gooden down and likely win a pretty dominant decision. Jared Gooden, despite his 17-5 record, is still pretty green in my opinion. He's only got one fight in the UFC, and overall he's just been smashing cans most of the time. And, as unreliable as Nurmagomedov is, he does have a great camp behind him and, he does have a strong wrestling base to lean to. But taking a look at this, from a DraftKings perspective, I don't know if I really want to play either guys for GPP because, there's a chance that if Nurmagomedov isn't able to get Gooden out of there in the first or second round, he might start to tire and we might see a late knockout for Gooden. But on the flip side of things, I also do potentially see a scenario where Nurmagomedov is able to gain, significant control time and is able to just grind out a decision, in which case, I definitely think he can potentially pay off his price tag. But, if he's not very active on the ground, he's going to be really reliant on just accumulating those points from control time. I definitely do think that Gooden is going to look to work his way back up. And, as the fight progresses, I think it's going to get harder and harder for Nurmagomedov to take and hold Gooden down. But overall, for Nurmagomedov, from a cash game perspective, I guess he's kind of safe because, outside of, gassing out and getting knocked out by Gooden, I don't really see him losing here. But again, the cardio is definitely in question. As far as, GPP goes, he might be worth the shot. A lot of other people are probably going to play Luque or O'Malley over him, so it might be a decent pivot play if, especially if he's able to get Gooden down and just puts on an absolute clinic on the ground, maybe even, choke him out or knock him out of there early. So, he might pay off in that sense. But, there are going to be a lot of other options or not a lot, but there are a few other options I like, to pay up for. As far as Jared Gooden goes, I don't know if I'm going to really look to play him. It's going to be a real tough matchup for him. On the feet, I do give him a bit of an advantage. I think that, he's got the power. He could very well knock out Nurmagomedov. Nurmagomedov doesn't seem to be the most durable guy here. And, his heart might not be completely there either. So that's definitely, something to consider. But from a cash game perspective, I don't think I could count on him to do that. I think that, it's going to be a little risky playing him. So I'd keep him strictly to GPP. And even then, I probably wouldn't be too exposed to him. I think that it's going to be a tough matchup for him. But he's got some power, so that's a bit of an equalizer. So for that reason, I think he is GPP viable, but not so much for cash games. Jessica Penne versus Hannah Goldy, and Hannah Goldy is going to be 8,300 here, and Penne is going to be 7,900. And this one is going to be a tricky one to break down, especially since you don't know how they're going to score the significant strikes for these women's MMA fights. They really tend to be a bit more generous with it, although I think recently they've kind of tightened it up a little more. And that definitely is going to play an effect here because I don't think either of these fighters are particularly high volume, but somehow Hannah Goldy was able to land 141 significant strikes against Callie Robbins when I was watching the fight live, it just looked like she was barely landing any pitter-patter shots and probably only landed like a third of those realistically. So if the fight metrics are really generous like they were in that matchup, this fight could potentially break the slate. The winner of this fight could probably, score like 100 plus points just from significant strikes. But assuming they're going to score it normally, I'm going to favor Penne a little bit more. I think that, she's going to be the one moving forward. And, she's just the much more technical striker in this matchup, in my opinion. Hannah Goldy, really green, really low level. Although, she's coming off of a year and a half layoff. And she might have made some, market improvements. But I don't think they're going to be that big. And, I can't really count on that. I just have to base this from what I've seen so far. And from what I've seen so far, Goldy is pretty bad. I mean, could she land those pitter-patter shots with her T-Rex arms to a split decision victory? Possibly, but more often than not, I think that, Penne is able to just walk her down, cut off the cage, and land the more impactful shots over the duration of the fight. I think that if Penne is even able to mix in a takedown, which she has shown to do before, at the end of each round, she could very well just win the round that way. So I favor Penne to win the decision here, but at the end of the day, this is pretty low-level women's MMA. Although I'd give, Penne a much bigger advantage, in the experience and the technique. So relatively low level still, but, this could be a really just back and forth fight where it could end in a split decision. So this potentially could go either way, but I lean Penne a bit more here. But from a DraftKings perspective, I really don't know if I want too much exposure to this fight. It really comes down to, again, how they hand out those, significant strikes. This could potentially be a really high-scoring fight or a pretty low-scoring one. I really don't know how they're going to, again, grade those significant strikes. But, assuming it's somewhere in between, I don't think this will be a particularly high-paced fight. I think whoever wins is going to only score about like 60 points or so. So I wouldn't really touch this from a GPP or cash game perspective. But I guess if you want to be super contrarian, I think you could take either one of these chicks for, your GPP lineup. I'd lean more towards Penne because, she's a little less expensive and I do favor her a bit more to win. So, I guess if you're feeling ballsy, you could take either one of these fighters. But I'd avoid these fighters from a cash game perspective completely. Alonzo Menifield versus William Knight, and this is a great one to target in my opinion. Menifield is going to be, 8,100, and Knight is going to be 8,100 as well. So 8,100 for either guy, and I can see why. I mean, it is lined as a pick'em fight, for the money line. But like I said on my money line podcast, I don't actually think it is a pick'em fight. I think Menifield should be favored much more here. I think that, Menifield obviously has a pretty significant advantage on the feet. I think he's a better striker overall and just way more explosive and way more powerful. He may not be super technical, but I still give him an advantage, standing, even if he didn't have that power. But he does have that power, and he's extremely dangerous with it. But taking a look at Jason Knight real quick, he's primarily a grappler. He likes to get a hold of his opponents, lay on top of him, work that ground and pound. But the thing is, his wrestling actually isn't that great. He just relies on his raw power to take a lot of guys down in the regional scene. I don't think that's going to happen here. Menifield is a big, strong guy. Knight is going to have a really hard time getting him down. But I don't even think he'll be able to close the distance because William Knight is just extremely plotty on the feet, keeps his hands low, and he's just bad on the feet, man. Like Menifield's gonna destroy him in my opinion. I think Menifield is gonna get an early knockout, and I am very, very confident that this happens. So I'm gonna be pretty heavy on Menifield when it comes to GPP, and I'll be playing him in cash lineups too because I really think this is an extremely favorable matchup for Menifield. In my opinion, Menifield, while I don't think he's a great fighter or anything, I think he really just excels at beating lower level, regional level kind of guys who aren't really UFC caliber or are borderline UFC caliber, and that's exactly the kind of fighter that Knight falls into. I think that Knight is, he's not that good on the feet. He's really reliant on his top control, which I think he'll have a hard time getting it to the ground because, even someone like Devin Clark, who I believe is, UFC caliber, really strong wrestler, wasn't able to take Menifield down. So yeah, I favor Menifield pretty heavily here. I think he gets the knockout. But I guess, if I had to say something for the other side, for those of you who might be high on Knight, I guess that Knight might be able to hold Menifield up against the cage, get a bit of control time there, maybe get the fight onto the ground, and yeah, again win some time and score some points. Just by accumulating control time. But I think he'll have a really hard time doing that. Menifield is a big, strong guy and probably the strongest guy he's faced up to date. I guess also Menifield is coming off of a pretty nasty knockout against OSP, and if he's maybe a little gun shy coming into this fight, it could be a very low pace sort of fight. But assuming Menifield comes out swinging like he usually does, this should be a pretty quick or pretty short night. So from a DFS perspective, I really like Menifield here. I'm going to play him a lot in GPP and cash games. As far as Knight goes, I'm looking to pretty much fade him. I don't even think I'm gonna touch him in GPP or cash. But yeah, maybe not go as heavy as me. I'd recommend. I'm personally really high on him. But if you want to play it a bit safe, maybe just limit Menifield to GPP. Jamie Mullarkey versus Khama Worthy, and another really interesting one here. Khama Worthy is 8,600 and Mullarkey is 7,600. So this is another one where I like the underdog. We have a grappler versus striker matchup here where Worthy is going to be the striker and Mullarkey is the grappler. So on the feet, I do give a pretty clear advantage to Worthy. He's primarily a striker. He stands a bit heavy on that lead leg. He's got, that kind of herky-jerky head movement. Really confuses opponents. He's also got pretty good counterpunching as well. So overall, I'd say he's a pretty good striker on the feet, pretty dangerous, and he does have knockout power. So, Mullarkey really does have to be careful about that. But taking a look at Mullarkey, I don't think his striking is awful or anything. I think that he can keep it close for a bit, but I really don't know if he wants to stay in prolonged striking exchanges against Worthy, and I don't really expect him to. As we've seen in his Riddell and Ziam fight, he was looking to get that takedown as soon as possible, and I do believe there's a good chance he will because the takedown defense of Worthy, I don't think it's that great. I think he will be able to stuff a few early in the fight, but Mullarkey, he's really aggressive with his takedowns. He will chain them together. He won't give up after the first one, so Worthy might have a bit of success early, but I do see Mullarkey eventually getting him to the ground and just winning minutes there. We saw in his Penne fight, he looked pretty bad off of his back, and he eventually did get his back taken as well. I do want to mention that Penne is a bit of a specialist when it comes to backpacking, although he got there pretty effortlessly. So I don't really rate Worthy's grappling defense that highly. So if Mullarkey is able to get it to the ground, I think he can get a pretty significant control time and might be able to do some damage down there. But again, I do favor Worthy more on the feet, and he does have the knockout upside. I just don't think the odds should be lined this way. I think it should be a much closer fight. So, taking a look at this from a DraftKings perspective, I think that, for cash games, I think Worthy is worth avoiding because he's really reliant on that KO. So you want someone who's, can score, pretty consistently. And I think Mullarkey is going to be the play here for cash games. I think that he's a solid underdog, so I don't think unless he gets knocked out early, he won't score too poorly. I think if he does win, he'll only be 7,600, I believe. Let me see here. Yeah, 7,600, and can probably get you a good 75, 80 points, depending on how much control time he's gotten. So decent for cash games. GPP wise, I'd say he's good there too because at the end of the day, you need someone who can. Fill in that underdog spot, those mid low 7,000 spots, and I think Mullarkey fits the bill there perfectly. He might not get like a finish or anything, so he's not going to score like a crazy amount. But at 7,600, you really only need them to score about like 75, 80 or so, assuming there aren't like a ton of knockouts on the card. And taking a look at Worthy, again, I don't really know if I want to play him for cash games because even if he wins, he'll have to win by knockout for him to really pay off his price tag. Whereas, if he wins a decision, I don't think he'll be scoring that much. So from a cash game perspective, I think he's a little risky. But for GPP, I think he's worth a few stabs because, at 8,600, he fits into a really good like mid-range sort of lineup if you don't feel that the heavy favorites should be scoring that much. And I could see a scenario where that happens, but more often than not, I will likely be passing on him just because you have Ngannou at 8,400 and Oleksiejczuk at 8,500. I think those are much better alternatives, but he might be worth a stab if you want to be a bit contrarian there, look to pivot. So yeah, Worthy, not a good cash play. Might be decent GPP, but not going to be too heavy on him. And Mullarkey, I think, is solid for both GPP and cash. Miranda Maverick versus Gillian Robertson, and pretty interesting one here. Maverick is going to be 8,800, and Robertson is going to be 7,400. So taking a look at this matchup real quick, I do favor Maverick a bit more on the feet. She is got a strong Muay Thai base, and overall her striking is pretty sharp, pretty decent, but her defensive striking isn't that great. She's rather hittable, and she keeps her head on the center line. So although I'm not sure if this matters too much for this matchup, since Robertson, she's not very comfortable on the feet. I don't actually think she's bad or anything on the feet, but it's pretty obvious that she's just using her striking to get the fight to the ground as soon as possible, and it doesn't seem like she really likes getting hit for prolonged periods. I mean, I guess not that anyone does, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that you can kind of see it in a lot of the striking exchanges. She tends to shy away from them, and really, she just looks to shoot the takedown as soon as there is any sort of opening, and that does get a bit predictable, and it's not good long term. But against a lower level opponent in Maverick, I don't think it's going to be too big of a deal. Maverick hasn't really shown any good takedown defense, and seems to be pretty bad in scramble situations. And once the fight does get to the ground, if she's not in a dominant position, she does seem a little lost there. And it's understandable. She's still pretty green. She's 8-2, only has one fight in the UFC, and is only 23. So I do expect her to make a good amount of improvements and stuff, but I think there still are a lot of holes in her grappling game that need to get fixed. And Robertson is a pretty high level grappler in my opinion as far as women's MMA goes. We have seen Robertson struggle a bit against physical or stronger, more physical fighters, like Tyler Santos and Macy Barber, but they actually had pretty decent wrestling and grappling defense and offense for that matter. So they were able to stuff her takedowns, and actually in Santos's case able to take Robertson down and just control her there for extended periods. But I don't think that Maverick has got quite the defensive grappling just yet. I think that her offensive grappling is decent, and if she's the one initiating the grappling exchanges, I do see her possibly getting the advantage there. But I do see opportunities for Robertson to sweep or reverse because Maverick does leave a number of openings when she's posturing up to land that ground and pound. So on the ground, I think that Robertson will have a pretty significant advantage. So I do favor Robertson a bit more in this matchup. So taking a look at this from a DraftKings perspective, I believe that Robertson is a solid value play here. She can save you a bit of cash here at 7,400. You could really afford to pay up for some of the other guys you like, and I don't think she will score too poorly either. If she is able to get those takedowns, I think she'll secure a significant amount of control time, and I wouldn't be surprised if she pulled off a submission too, getting you some of that finish money. So I think that Robertson's going to be a pretty solid play for cash and GPP. I like her a little bit more for GPP. I think that if she does win, she will pay off her price tag pretty easily, and I like the submission upside for her. But as far as Maverick goes, I don't know if I'll be playing her too much. That price tag is just kind of unappealing. I mean, at 8,800, there's just a ton of other options that I think are much better at scoring higher. Like you look at guys like O'Malley and Luque and potentially even Worthy or Morales. I don't know if Maverick is going to be getting a finish this fight. Yeah, she got a finish in her last fight against Joshua, and I don't want to say it was fluky, but I don't think that happens again. If it wasn't for that cut, I don't think she gets that finish. I do think she would have won that fight, and she would have likely gone to a very dominant decision, probably beat up Joshua pretty badly, but she was taking a good amount of damage herself too. But going back to this matchup, I just don't really see her scoring that much. I don't think she gets the finish, so she'll likely take it to a decision. And from just purely striking, I don't think she'll have the output to really score that much, especially since I don't think Robertson is going to be standing with her. She's going to look to tie her up as much as possible, look to put her against the cage, and she's going to work that single leg and try and chain takedowns together. So I don't see Maverick getting too many shots off. If anything, it'll be a very grindy kind of fight if she does win a decision. And overall, I really don't see her getting the finish. So we'll likely be avoiding Maverick in most of my GPP and cash lineups. Sean O'Malley versus Thomas Almeida, and a pretty exciting matchup. I'm actually really looking forward to this fight, but let's take a look at their price tags real quick. Sean O'Malley 9,200, Almeida 7,000. And just to give a quick rundown of the fight, two strikers primarily. I favor O'Malley quite a bit more on the feet, actually. He's got a much more diverse striking attack, mixes it up, extremely dynamic, throws plenty of feints. His angles are good, his accuracy and timing is good, and just overall, I'd say his striking game is just way better than Almeida's. Although offensively speaking, I think that Almeida's striking isn't bad. It's just not quite as layered as O'Malley's. And Almeida, the main concern with him is his striking defense. He likes to move in, keep his head on the center line, and he's extremely hittable. And his durability is definitely an issue too. He's been hurt. He's been dropped in a lot of fights, and against someone like O'Malley, who's a fucking sniper on the feet, that's very, very concerning. So again, I favor O'Malley quite a bit on the feet. I think he's good for the knockout here, honestly. But the biggest concern with O'Malley is his durability, and that can't be overlooked anymore, man. Like in the Sukum top fight, he hurt himself, and in the most recent fight, he got hurt too. And he actually hurt himself on the regional scene, I believe, a little while back. So yeah, I do think he wins this, but who knows? What if he just rolls his ankle in there, or if Almeida just crumples him with the calf kick, or if he breaks his hand going for a spinning back fist. I mean, the possibilities are endless here, and while I do think he gets the knockout, it's just the durability is a bit of a liability here, and definitely really concerning. But taking a look at this from a DraftKings perspective, I think that O'Malley is playable in both cash and GPB games. I think that he's relatively safe. I mean, his durability, again, is a concern, but assuming he does hold up in this, I think he will most likely get the knockout, and if he doesn't, I think he'll win a pretty dominant decision. He'll be going off on Almeida, but I think he's gonna be able to get Almeida out of there. I mean, Almeida's defense is just way too porous, and his chin is very questionable at this point. So I'm really confident that O'Malley does get it done. So yeah, I like him both for GPP and cash. And as far as Almeida goes, I don't want to touch him for cash at all. There's a good chance he's not going to score more than like 1.5 points. But as far as GPP goes, I don't think he's a complete fade, but I wouldn't play him too much either, because again, there is that chance that O'Malley's potentially going to get hurt, and after what you've seen on the tape, you're going to have to assume that Almeida is going to look to chop at those legs. But interestingly enough, I think that if he throws too many naked leg kicks, O'Malley's just going to line one down the pipe and knock him out. But I just really have a hard time seeing Almeida winning this, from a striking perspective. So yeah, overall a pretty tough fight for Almeida in my opinion, but who knows, he might be able to hurt O'Malley and potentially get him out of there. But I don't think that's too likely here. I wouldn't be surprised though, but more often than not, I think that O'Malley should be able to get it done here. So in conclusion, I think that O'Malley's a pretty solid, cash game and GPP play. Maybe a bit more GPP. I wouldn't play him as much in cash because of the durability concerns. And for Almeida, we'll likely avoid him in cash games and maybe very, very little in GPP. Tyron Woodley versus Vicente Luque, and Luque is going to be priced at 9,100 and Woodley is going to be priced at 7,100. And diving right into it, I do think that Luque should win here. I mean, he's a really good aggressive striker. He likes to back opponents down and then unload on him. Offensively, he checks all the boxes. Defensively, leaves a bit to be desired, though. He is pretty hittable, and he takes a lot of damage in all of his fights. taking a look at Woodley, he's had just awful performances in his last 3 fights. And, even before that, he's always been prone to just backing up and being really, really low volume. I want to say that Luque is able to just back him down and just unload on him, possibly get him out of there. But, I got a really weird feeling about this fight because at this stage in his career, Woodley's pretty clearly a counter puncher. And, he's just going to look for that counter shot all fight. And, it might not ever materialize, but the way Luque likes to move forward, it'll give him plenty of opportunities to find that clean shot. Whereas, in his previous fights, he's been going up against grapplers who have always just been able to take the fight to the ground and look to just control him there and really just completely mitigate that right hand that he has. Ultimately, though, I do think that Luque should be able to take this. He's going to have the volume advantage, and he's going to be the more aggressive fighter. He's going to be landing clean a lot more. And assuming Woodley doesn't turn back the clocks in this fight, he should be able to coast to a pretty dominant victory, or maybe even get the late knockout on Woodley. However, I just got a really bad feeling about this fight. There's really no reasoning or logic behind it, but it's just a really weird feeling that I have about it. But that out of the way, taking a look at this from a DFS standpoint, I think that Luque should be a relatively safe play. Assuming Woodley just isn't able to explode and land a clean one on Luque, he should be able to win this pretty handily. Might score pretty well with the significant strikes, and is possibly live for the KO. Although, I'm not even completely convinced that Luque is going to have a crazy amount of significant strikes in this matchup. I think if anything, he might respect the power of Woodley a bit still in this fight, and he's not going to look to overextend. I mean, yeah, he'll put on a bit of a clinic, but he's not going to be throwing like 120, 130 significant strikes, in my opinion. I could be wrong, though, but I got a feeling that Luque might play it a bit safe in this fight and just look to touch up Woodley and avoid that right hand of his. With how low volume Woodley is, I think that Luque can very easily just coast to a decision and not have to overwork himself. So I think that's the angle I'm taking here. So personally, I'm not going to play Luque too much. I definitely will have some exposure to him in some GPP. Probably not so much in cash games either. Just because I think that it'll be kind of tough for Luque, or not tough, but I don't think that Luque will pay off his price tag. There is a chance that he might, but I'm not super high on it. So, I'm going to have a little bit of exposure for GPP on Luque, but not too much. And taking a look at Woodley, though, I wouldn't play him at all for cash games. And maybe a couple lineups for GPP, just because, priced at 7,100, he'll really open up the rest of, the roster. And if he is able to land clean on Woodley, he'll score pretty damn well, too. So I'm not counting on that happening, though. I think more often than not, Luque is going to be able to back Woodley down, just kind of tee off on him a bit and kind of just coast to a decision while staying safe. But, this is MMA. Again, anything can happen. Woodley is dangerous. He does have that really dangerous right hand, and this could potentially be his last fight in the UFC if he doesn't get the win. So, if he wants to keep cashing those checks, he's going to have to start throwing, and this might be the fight that he does. Although, I'm not counting on it, but I wouldn't be surprised if, he pulled off an upset here. So, yeah, so for Woodley, I wouldn't play him too much. Well, I wouldn't play him at all for cash, and maybe just 2 or 3 lineups or so for Stipe Miocic versus Francis Ngannou. And Ngannou is going to be priced at 8,400, and Miocic is going to be priced at 7,800. And this will be a pretty tricky one to navigate, and this fight will make or break a lot of lineups for a lot of people. It's just one of those fights where you really need to have exposure for it. I think that whoever wins this fight will likely be on the winning lineup. I mean, because you have Ngannou at 8,400. If he wins, it's likely going to be early knockout. He's going to, break 100 points. And, at 8,400, I don't know if we'll ever see that price tag on Ngannou, at least not for a really long time. And, Miocic at 7,800, if he wins, he'll likely win a really grindy decision. And I believe the last time, he went to 5 rounds with Ngannou, he scored 141 points. So yeah, if either of these guys wins, I think there's a really good chance they're on the optimal lineup. So I think this is a fight you're going to need a ton of exposure for. And how you divvy it up is completely up to you. It's just, whoever you have a stronger lean on, you just go a little heavier on him. But, for me personally, I like Stipe a little bit more. For DFS, he's got, slightly less. He's at 7,800. And overall, I just feel he's the more well-rounded mixed martial artist. Ngannou's still very knockout reliant. Granted, his knockout power is extremely dangerous, and there is a good chance he can knock Stipe out. But if he isn't able to, I favor Stipe a lot more. I think that, if he looks to take the fight to the ground, he can grind Ngannou out for the decision. And as far as their striking goes, I actually favor Stipe a bit more. He's the more technical striker, but the thing with Ngannou is, he's got a ton of power, and that's just the greatest equalizer in the sport. So, if he is able to line clean on Stipe, he could very well put him out. And, in that first fight, Stipe was able to eat, a few shots from Ngannou and was able to still win the decision there. So I don't think that Stipe's durability has gotten any better. So that's definitely a concern as to, how many more of those shots he can take from Ngannou. And we haven't really gotten an opportunity to see just how much Ngannou's improved. So, this is a really, really tricky fight to break down. And I really see points from both sides, and I think both guys are, extremely viable here. So taking a look at this from DFS standpoint, I think they're primarily going to be GPP plays. Like I said before, I think there's really good chance that, whoever wins this fight is on the optimal lineup. So I think it's going to be good to be, have a lot of exposure on this fight. But as far as cash games go, though, I might actually just avoid this fight because it's a 50-50 fight, and that kind of defeats the purpose of, double of these cash games. So yeah, I'm probably not really going to look to play either guys because there's a good chance that one of these guys just doesn't score well at all, maybe less than like 10 points, and that could really drag the rest of your lineup down. But yeah, unfortunately not too much analysis or anything here. I mean, if you guys have a really strong lean on either guy, then just go a little heavier on him. But yeah, that pretty much does it. I think both guys are good options for GPP. Personally, I don't think I'll be taking them cash, but I wouldn't hate on it too much if you did.